thank you so much, Niles, for joining me today. Very excited to chat about Nestment and your journey so far. It's been a really incredible one that you've had throughout your career and journey. So before we get into Nestment and sort of the catalyst for it, what it is, what you want it to be, sort of the mission and vision, talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, maybe before Nestment, and then we'll get into everything.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for having me. Love of the podcast and the focus you have on folks who are disrupting and also creating social impact. So that's definitely been a thread or a theme in the things that I've been doing, especially lately, and we'll come to Nestment in just a bit. Grew up in the Bay Area. We'll talk more about. I think a lot of my startups have always connected to some personal thread or passion or background.
Yeah.
Went to Harvard for undergrad, so did my East Coast time. Went through my winters and my obligatory kind of couple years in New York, and then came back to California. And Nestment came right around the pandemic time, but interestingly enough, that was also a time where we were, building a lot of other companies that were focused on how could we create kind of economic empowerment for a lot of different folks in different models, especially things that had been disrupted by COVID. So my first startup that I was a founding member of that I had made some capital on to be able to invest in things was in the mobile technology industry, very different from all the things that I do now. But I learned a lot in that process. That company ended up being part of a larger company that was on NASDAQ, and I had a larger P&L and a global team, and got a lot of great experiences from that. It's funny because I was reflecting with a friend of mine. Now you see QR codes everywhere, but we were the first kind of company that was really starting to understand how to use it. So back in I think it was 2009, I think we did the first text call to action in the Wall Street Journal, and then we did the first QR code in a magazine, and people were like, "What the heck is this?" Like that type of thing.
Man, it's so funny you say that. That was, I remember having this conversation with my wife, and I was like, you know what? I'm like, a little bit of an applause for those founders, those companies who really stuck with the QR code, because I don't think it really took off. There was probably a decade there. It was kind of in this not dead zone, but it was not really growth, right? You kind of saw it here and there, and you're like, this is really interesting. I don't know why more people kind of don't utilize it, and it just didn't really go anywhere. And then all of a sudden, it felt like a week. It is everywhere. I'm sure these companies grew 300%, in that time. And I was just like, that just goes to show, you never know what's going to be sort of this moment in time where, for those founders that built those companies, or even just the employees who maybe had equity and kind of, it was just really, really amazing to see that their time is now. So go ahead.
No, we were fortunate that we had a bunch of things that wasn't all that we were focused on, but that was one. We always, we were watching out Docomo in Japan at that time. It was being used a lot more there. And so we're like, definitely going to come here. But it also, goes to show you that things that can be really efficient, really effective, exciting. I was always into this notion of how do you turn books alive through the QR code and having around. Remember getting drunk. I won't name the person, but getting drunk with an art curator one day and going into his museum late at night and being like, "We need to record you and put QR codes on all of these different
yes.
Get it." But so it's great to see that with the right push and in the right moments, even if it came out, there's these kind of positive byproducts. Speaking of positive byproducts, a lot of one of the companies that I had to shrink at that time. It was a New York Times funded company that was all around how do groups tell a collective narrative and story together, called Enwoven, and it actually started off as me kind of wanting. My father passed when I was young, and I always wanted to know. I was about to get married to my wife Alicia. Wanted to know what my father would say to me at this time. This was in 2013 or time frame, and so I started just collecting all of this great content from friends and family. Saw that the metadata was pretty rich. This was obviously a decade before what we're seeing now in terms of generative AI, but you could finally understand the timelines of what happened in the 60s and 70s, right? And you could understand he was in the Navy, so you could understand where he was at different moments in time by leveraging location. And so that became a New York Times funded project that led into, you never know where your startups are going to go. And now it captures institutional knowledge for a whole bunch of organizations. It focuses a lot actually on fashion brands and the stories behind the clothes that get created. Yep. So still exists as a wonderful company. But in that process, I wanted to make sure that all the folks still had jobs or we still had fun things to work on. So started a small little kind of, call it like a personal venture studio. And we were doing all types of really interesting things. I've always been interested in small businesses too, as well as big scalable businesses. So had a salon that was focused. My partner came to this country from Italy with $500 in his pocket. My partner in the salon, and he not much English, but could speak the language of hair, right? And then he had this long
Nice.
line of folks who signed up. And I said, well, what if we had some capital and opened your own place? And he was very enterprising. But that place has become a place where a lot of folks coming to this country who, in San Francisco, like they need to find a place where they have really great skills and can kind of fit that brand. We actually ended up shutting that down during COVID and turning it into a hair lab. So one entrepreneur was building a robotic haircut mechanism. This was pre-vaccine, so it could do men's buzz cuts, which was pretty amazing. But not many people wanted to sit in that chair, though.
Sure.
Well, ultimately, I think the thing that was best that came out of it is we built something called the Salon Box, which was just a mobile way for our stylists to go out. It was like luggage.
I like that. Yeah.
The best thing on the market. And so that's there. And then we noticed that gyms were shutting down. And so worked with a personal trainer who had a great life story. And we noticed that there were a lot of 1,000-square-foot retail spaces that unfortunately would never come back. So we started looking at building out a system called Reset Fitness, which was for formerly incarcerated folks to get apprentice and become master trainers and potentially. So we started a pilot there that still exists. A collective group of artists of color called Culture Drawn that Boundless Brooklyn, the book came out of, early NFT stuff, like some really interesting things. One of the things we did there that we were experimenting with was since a lot of people were working from their home office, one thing we thought about, we worked with a couple companies to take the company's values and have them pair them with an artist. The artist would get the commission. If you go to culturedrawn.com, you could probably see this, but the artist would get the commission for the work. And then it would be replicated like 1,000 times and it would go to everyone's home office, right? So you would have this kind of beautiful artistic representation of company values sitting in everyone's home office since they couldn't go to the office, right? And then you'd be supporting the artist that you selected, but at the same time, the whole community, even if another artist didn't get selected, would make money off of the replication. So we had a framer and a printer and stuff like that. So that was cool. And all of these live in different iterations, but Nestment was the one that really had a lot of legs. And what Nestment was about, and maybe other folks were feeling this way because we were all in our environments, was the conversation you might have with family and friends to say like, hey, can we buy a place together, right? And It could be a primary home, it could be an investment property. A lot of times, honestly, a lot of people were talking about, can we just have a second home together that we can get away to be in our pod together, whatever it may be. So people were thinking about, what does home mean to me? How is home changing? If I can work from home all the time, can I live in multiple places? And instead of renting all the time, can I actually have an equity stake in that? So had these conversations a lot. I reflected on my own experiences, which when my father passed, I born in Oakland, then grew up in the People's Republic of Berkeley across the way. And when dad passed, mom was an immigrant to the country. She didn't have a job, much community support, but she was smart and scrappy. And at an early age, at around 13, we went in and we learned how to refinance the house and take some equity because we were fortunate enough to have a home in a place that had appreciated. That really helped my mom out. We also ended up renting out the room to graduate students, renting out our rooms. So we'd have Nigerian math PhDs or Swedish physicists at the dinner table. And outside of sharing bathrooms, my brother and I talk about this, how much fun it was. But there was also a stability that we had because life could have been very different. We could have been moving around a lot. We could have been at a very kind of meaningful moment in our upbringing, but we had that home, and that home meant a lot to us. And I always remember that. So after the first startup that we talked about on the mobile side, and I had saved some capital, decided with how could I kind of deploy that capital to help other family and friends, purchase places that seem too expensive in the
Yep.
Bay Area. So especially multifamily, which is a really interesting thing to look at for folks, is hey, there's a duplex or a triplex, or and a lot of people jump to the single family home model,
Yep.
right? But I think
Yep.
especially in urban areas, like maybe you start with and you either can live in one or two of the units, rent out one or
Yep.
two of the units, and now you're offsetting some of your expenses. You're leveraging the depreciation on that rental income, the depreciation from a write-off standpoint, but you're gaining the appreciation of the equity value over time. So you take something like a triplex in Oakland that starts off as a TIC where multiple people are living in there. They slowly move on, then it becomes a cash generating LLC. You refinance in 8-9 years, and that check is so meaningful to each person, and that they've seen the time value of money and so forth. So there are all of these different models, and so as I was reflecting on my past, and I had done this now a few different times, I realized how just friction filled it was.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, it's brutal. Yeah, it's
It's
brutal.
brutal, right? Like I was the guy pulling data from Zillow, not just like a listing, but historical data, and then pulling in rental data. And, for whatever, I couldn't afford the really great data. I could only get kind of this data. And then I'd build a spreadsheet and then get my group aligned. And then, then I'd look for a lender that was going to be open to a group kind of coming to them. And then
Yeah.
then I'd have to build an operating agreement that says, hey, here's the rules of the road so that we're all on the same page, so this doesn't cause any conflict. And so that's what Nestment in a lot of ways was solving for. And I had my co-founder I had two amazing co-founders who worked with me in the past companies. And one of them was like, hey, Niles, there's no way you're paying me enough to ever afford the Bay Area. I'm going to go in with some friends in a place in Joshua Tree because I love going down there. We can, rent it out. And how did you do it? And that sparked this Nestment conversation. So like with everything I tell people is start with some basic data and don't be afraid to share your idea with the world. So
Yeah.
all we did was we put up a landing page for Nestment at the end of 2021 and flighted some Instagram ads just to see like, hey, is the CPA, the cost per acquisition, reasonable enough that if we ever had to turn on paid advertising, we could actually get people. And then we did some LinkedIn campaigns, which were pretty much nothing in terms of cost. And the response we got back from just a landing page with a product that didn't exist was overwhelming.
Wow.
All these people saying to us, how did you know we were having this conversation? I feel left out of this market. I'm, an older millennial turning 40 soon or 30 something now. And I thought I would have a house by now, right? Like, what are the different ways? And so we realized we had to build something. And that's where Nestment came in as this, as this both platform and company that would allow for people, take them through the process to pool their capital, have their agent, their lending, their operating agreement, make good financial decisions, and ultimately finally own real estate together.
Wow. So the idea is, I think it's also a great just, entrepreneurial sort of like advice is like landing page, some ads. I mean, that's not a big budget, right? I mean, pretty much anybody could do that sort of early stage testing like that to get just an idea if you want to go further. After you sort of got that initial, data and response from just the landing page and some ads, I guess what were the next step? Was it like seriously going out raising? Was it saying, okay, let's go raise some money? Also, was there anything like, let's look into even if it's possible to kind of curate all these documents in one place? Because like you said, the documents in real estate is a mess. Then you have the form side. If you do form sort of an LLC, if it's an investment property, or if you're buying it as a group, it's everybody has to have socials and all these different things combined, and probably financial documents in there. And so, then you have your friends seeing stuff. Like, I guess from landing page to feedback there, right? And then when was sort of actual launch, right? And say, okay, let's go raise some money, and then let's actually build some tech.
Yeah, let me walk you through kind of the past 7 quarters, because Nestment has followed a path. And I was just chatting with somebody that like you almost it's weird because it's aspirational in an interesting way, right? And I hope it continues to be aspirational. But as somebody, this is kind of like the third startup experience, and then working with a lot of friends and mentoring. This doesn't happen all the time, but we were very intentional about each step. So I'll walk through that process. So the first thing, so I look at the world and any business idea from a lens of three things: desirability, feasibility, and viability. Desirability: do people want this? Feasibility: is this something we can build, right? Or are there the huge blockers? And then
Right.
viability: will this actually become a business? And unit economics, I think, are becoming more and more important for startups right now, right? We know a lot of startups, and we know the venture model is kind of broken, right? Because the founder and the VC are often not aligned, because the VC, cares about, and maybe my VC friends will, I think most of them will actually agree with this, that there's 7 of those 10 companies that are going to go away, and they really care about that one that's going to make 100x, and maybe the other 2 that make somewhere in between. And therefore, like, the goal of, I've just seen so many people take so much money. We'll talk about how we're looking at fundraising differently, and maybe in a different way. We did raise a round of funding, and how we're thinking about it, because we've had a lot of great milestones recently. Start with the landing page. This was desirability. Do people really actually want this, right? So just go out there, throw a landing
Yep.
page out, flight some Instagram ads, do some LinkedIn campaigns. Then now we did 200 plus user interviews, right? So the next thing was feasibility, right? So we're like, hey, you signed up for this. You're on a wait list for this. Can we interview you, right? Like, what would you ideally like? What are you trying to do? Then in this process, we built what I call a manual MVP. So it's literally Google Sheets and duct tape, right? Like, it's like, hey,
Classic. Yeah.
you as a group, Selena and Wade, you are 2 folks in Brooklyn who've been outpriced in Brooklyn, although you're professionals making decent money. So now you're thinking, hey, can I own in Hudson Valley, live there part of the time, rent it out to offset expenses? Okay, if we take you through a process that's highly manual, right? That's like, here's the process from, we're doing the calculations in Google Sheets, we're keeping notes in Google Docs, you're filling out a Google form that will turn into an operating agreement, like all of those steps. Do you still stay with us through the process? And what do we learn through that before we go and spend a ton of money building something, right? So we did this MVP, and it turns out that the endpoint is so desirable. The other thing that we always have to be careful of, because I think one thing that kills startups, is false positive. It's when someone says, I would like to do this, I want your service, or I want something. It's easy to say yes. It's not easy to give your time, your energy. And we literally we took a small group of like 10 folks, and we saw people, very busy people, showing up for 1-hour calls with us, walking through a sheet or a form or listings we compiled from another company, like things like that, right?
Yeah.
And so that said to us, the outcome or reward is exciting enough that people are willing to go through all this, but now we can make all of this much easier. So when we had that moment, that's when we're like, okay, we're going to really start to build the team, and we were already building in the background. One of our co-founders is an engineer, was the head of engineering. And then that's when we raised capital, right? And we were very deliberate and intentional about how we raised. So we raised some money from a great blockchain fund, 2 operators who had built a really amazing company and made a lot of money from that. But like, we had a larger thesis that, as you build fractional supply, you'll be able to put it on chain, and you'll make, real estate more transparent 3-5 years down the line, right? So not even focused on that right now, but it's great to have. And they had interest in it too, because they were building their own real estate portfolio. Got some prop tech experience. A guy named Chris Langford, who used to run Lowe's strategic venture fund, and Lowe's like Home Depot. And he was very thesis driven, saw what was coming on the horizon. We also noticed that there were a lot of professionals of color and communities of color who actually understood the notion of cooperative economics. A lot of immigrant cultures too, whether it's Atanda in the Latino culture, a Hui in the Chinese, or a Susu in the Caribbean culture, whatever it might be, Eastern European culture. The notion of pooling capital was not new, right? Like, we're not coming up with, but there wasn't a structure necessarily in the US that was
Yeah.
built from a financing standpoint, a legal standpoint, that felt, easy. And then actually the tools to help someone through. But it was important that we empowered those cultures. And we were finding a ton of professionals of color coming to our site and saying, hey, I really want to
Yep.
raise my hand for this. So Concrete Rose Capital was another great fund. They're amazing. They also give 50%. A lot of funds will say they give money back. They give a number, 50% of their carry in their fund goes to specific, tech equity opportunities. And that was interesting to me. And then Vamos Ventures was focused on the Latino community. There's a huge amount of opportunity for home ownership, and it was
Yeah.
already happening in the Latino community. So that was really important to have some of those folks, some early executives at Airbnb. That was important because they saw I see Airbnb as having some. I'd like to believe that there's some, and they've kind of said that there's some kind of analogous points of building a movement, knowing that this kind of already exists on some level, but like people crashing with other people, things of that
Yep.
nature, but building it into a movement where in 10 years, right, this is the main way you're going to be buying a portion of real estate that you can live in, spend time in, or rent out or whatever, because it's going to be too expensive it takes you right now 10 years to save up for your primary. So maybe we don't have to do our primary first, right? Maybe we start with something else. And so getting that to be part of the retirement plan or the financial plan of younger and younger people. So very intentional about how we raise the money. Cap table is 70% investors of color. And I don't bring that up because it's like, hey, this is not like a virtue signaling thing. This was like, there were capitalistic reasons for this as well as social reasons, right? So MVP, then we saw our first close in a very, we got hit everyone got hit, like middle of, or kind of like Q1 of 2022, end of Q1 of 2022, rates shot up, right? Such a shoot. Everyone, inflation's crazy. Everyone's really, really scared. And obviously we're still riding through a lot of this right now. But all of a sudden people are like, wait, should you even be in the real estate industry? And the interesting thing about that was, and I was telling people, like, these short-term headwinds, yes, will affect us a little bit, but they're really long-term tailwinds. And the reason is, if you look at the charts, even from 2019 to September of 2022, it takes you double the salary to buy the same home. Now, why is that? Right? That's because interest rates shot up. Property prices that already were really high because of low interest rates, a few other issues, lack of supply, et cetera, they didn't go down at the same rate. No, they flattened, right? They softened, and you may have seen that in your Kansas City purchase, right? There's maybe a few more homes on listed for a little bit longer. People weren't as competitive bidding up homes, but interest rates shot up, at a level that we had historically in terms of just how quickly they shot up. So now the cost of home ownership required you to have double the salary in 3 years. And no one's going to double their salary unless something really, very few people will be doubling their salary in 3 years. And so you now have to either consider that, or you have people who are like, I'm going to be a lifelong renter, right? And that doesn't feel great when you feel like, because we see the psychological benefits of home ownership and real estate ownership, not as well as the financial benefits, being the number one generational wealth builder. So it was interesting. And so despite all of that, in our manual groups, we had transactions go through, right? Like we had people get all the way to the end, right? Of this process. And so we're like, okay, that's a real good sign for us. And at the same time, the team was building in the background. February 21st hits, we launched the open beta of the platform. You have this moment that's exciting, goes out on TechCrunch, right? And you're not knowing what to expect, right? And even if this is your third startup, you're like, oh, maybe everyone's going to come on. But not everyone comes on, right? Like a lot of people take notice, right? And they're like, oh, this is really cool. Like signing me up, like that type of thing. But it's not like this, like all of a sudden moment where you're seeing things burst. And so, I said to my team, look, we're building this for the long term. This is an open beta. We're not, no paid marketing or advertising. Let's take our time here. Our goal is going to be 100 qualified groups who are committing to a Nestment in the next 12 months. Call it by July 1st, right? We launch, essentially March 1st, give us 4 months, right, to get there. So we're doing some webinars. We're doing, different groups, helping people understand. People are coming on. People are telling other people about it. So we're slowly getting to that 100. We're at a really nice clip towards that 100. And I think it's important to create goals that seem hard but also achievable, right? And have the whole team all focus on it. That was this kind of great moment. And then we actually end up doing a partnership with Built. And I don't know if people are familiar with Built, BILT. Built's a phenomenal company. They actually are doing something that also you're kind of like, oh, I wish this existed when I was renting, but you can pay your rent and get
Yep.
points, right?
This is
So you
great.
get
This is
points.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, you get points for renting, which is awesome. And you can do it to travel. Turns out now you can do it to help your closing costs on Nestment, eventually maybe a down payment or something like that. But we end up, the head of
Yep.
home ownership, John Lawless, wrote an article about co-ownership, but now you've got all these, call it urban millennial professionals, right, who are in cities all over the place who are saying, I'm not going to wait, to get into the real estate game. I've been actually waiting to do this. And so, we think, okay, maybe I decide to scale up for another 100 groups, right? That'll come on just through this partnership. Next thing you know, we're hit with 1,000 more groups, right? Like qualified groups. And so now I would say we're in that active retooling stage, right? Where we're like, okay, how do we handle all of this demand? Nurture these leads, because each one of these groups, I take 10 to 15% of the groups myself because I
Wow.
want to be there through the process. And, it could be I've got a group of 4 guys who own a cafe who now are getting the chance to buy the building that their landlord is, and it has 2 livable units above.
Yeah.
I have a group of unmarried women who are like, we were kind of told we had to wait till we found a partner and have kids and then buy our primary home, but it's we're now in our early 30s and we've been paying rent together as roommates for a long time. We want to find our own.
Right.
I have intergenerational families like, hey, we want to move in together and make this work. So these incredible stories where they're like, we've either, some people have put the money in the bank together already, but just didn't know what to do, what the next step was. So we're taking our time. We're in this really unique moment where we now get to really focus on what is the right process for all of these folks. And then once they purchase, how do we help them manage? And then on the back end, on the exchange side, how do we help people exit? Because eventually certain people might want to exit. And then how do we allow for people who already own homes to maybe offer pieces of their home? So we had people who'd come to us and say, hey, I own this cabin in Tahoe, and I've always it's been great, it's increased, but I'd love for someone else to own part of it. I'd love to get some liquidity. Could I sell 25% of it to somebody else? So we have 3 kind of general groups, either groups who are already there together, they talked about it, we enable them, groups that are partially formed that will match them with someone else who also is looking at, or we may take a short-term investment, so call it a year or 2, we'll be a 3rd or 4th or 5th partner to help them out, right? But eventually our goal is not to be a company owning a ton of real estate. Our goal is to make more homeowners, right? And then the last is what we call no group, no problem, where we'll have more and more opportunities for people to just purchase a portion of a property.
Gotcha.
And the last thing I'll say about that is one of the things we're really pushing forward with is this notion of lifestyles and not listing. And I say those words because it's like, okay, think about how you want to live your life and less about the initial place you're going, in the sense of you love wine, you want to have a getaway place, your budget is X, you live here. Maybe Napa and Sonoma is not the place to do.
Right.
Maybe Los Olivos, an up and coming wine area outside of LA, is the how to do it. You love cycling, you love art, whatever it is you do. How can you start to think about that? And how does that lifestyle actually pay for itself, right? And so how does the real estate, offset with rental income? How is the equity you're gaining from the appreciation as well, helping you kind of live that life? So that's something we're just kind of actively thinking through with a lot of our groups.
There's so many questions. I'll try to narrow it down here.
Right, that was long-winded.
No, I love it. I love it. I think I want to take maybe one case study, right? Let's look at that through the kind of, not the entire process, but like give people an idea, right? So let's say you have 4 or 5 couples, and maybe they want to have like a get a place together as sort of this secondary place, vacation place, and then also maybe rent it out or something like that whenever they're not there, or whether the couple's not there. Is that process then, is it always creating like an LLC to buy it together, or do you just have a bank account where you put funds in and you sort of, I guess maybe just walk us through
Yeah,
that process.
I'll walk you through that process. So we go through a process for folks where what we try to do is get groups, what we call nestment ready in 5 to 6 weeks. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that they need to buy then. But what it does, so the first step is we focus on what is your why, right? Like, why are you
Mm-hmm.
what's
Yep.
the goal? Is it for you to have a place to get away that pays for itself? Is it, we'll have someone say, you know what, I don't even care about the cash flow as long as it breaks even or gains appreciation that pays for my daughter's college. We have all different types of, different kind of whys. So we focus on what is your why. Then we look at your search criteria, right? Like, what are you looking at? Like, what are so you think a lot of people know exactly where they want to go. A lot of people don't, right? A lot of people are like, hey, and that's where the platform really comes into play and
Yep.
help kind of look for different places. But we'll look at it, maybe 2 or 3 different locations based on what they need. Then that group of folks will then actually give them what's called a property analysis. So it both sits on the platform and on a document. And the goal is not to pull the trigger on any of those properties, but just to say, here's how they paper it out, right? Like, here's how, this is the forward looking appreciation of Nashville, of Denver, of, Atlanta or wherever it might be. Here's, Algonquin, Maine, because you want something about a code. I don't know, whatever it may be. Like, here's what it papers out. Here's how much you can rent it for. Here's how many personal days you could spend there if you want, that type of thing. So we get people thinking about what's the type of property they want, right? And then, and almost identifying it. Now, most of the time they won't get that one that they want because they'll go fairly quickly, but that's okay, right? Like,
Sure.
unless they want to like jump in, and if they want to jump in, we can move a lot faster, but we're not about pushing people. We want people to get things lined up. Next, we actually have them meet with our lender partners, and so our lender partners actually then kind of put together the right path for them. Usually, you can have up to like 4 signers on your typical kind of QM loan, right?
Okay.
And there's certain things that you're navigating through that process that it's great to have. And our partners all are educated on groups and have done groups and things like that before. Then we'll narrow it down to, okay, this is the location, connect you with an agent. So now as you're looking at, you now know how much you can afford. You now know the kind of economics and the type of property you're looking at. And then as you're looking with the agent, we actually start you on an operating agreement, which is essentially going through a checklist. You don't have to go through all the legalese, right? But we have it there for you. But you're going and saying, hey, this is how I want to handle things. And there are some things around managing the unknowns. Let's put 3 to 6 months of mortgage in a separate account or an escrow account or something that we don't touch, right? Unless there's something that happens. Because the worst is when something happens to somebody and you never know, and then all of a sudden there's a panic. But if you give yourself 3 to 6 months, right, people can calm down. People can understand, okay, we've got this extra capital we set aside. So oftentimes when people give us their budget for their down payment, we say, hey, let's take a percentage of that and put it away, actually. Like,
Gotcha.
let's not go there. Let's have that as extra. So we try to help people manage the unknown. So then they go through, fill out the forms. A lot of times groups love to figure out what their LLC name will be called together, right? And so forth. And then,
like naming a boat.
Exactly, right? Like, you get that there's kind of a hit there. And then, and then typically we will, there are different models, but typically once the place closes, we will then make sure that the lending can be assumable, and that the title can be put into the LLC, right? And so that's kind of the process that we go through. Now you have an operating agreement that's driving the LLC. So all steps of that process, we try to take people through both. It's in the platform as a checklist. We have a relationship manager who kind of helps you along that process. But at the end of the day, you now have your place, you've got your agreement, you've got your lending, you have a sense directionally of what it should look like from an economics perspective. At that point, we then put you in touch with a property manager that we vetted in the area. And then we give you a dashboard.
Wow.
If you and 3 other couples are all going in and you're going to use it, right, versus and rent it out part of the time, we're creating this thing called a group calendar, where we call it a group draft, where you guys get to draft, different weeks. And so it's like get together for a beer or wine and draft together, like which week. And you'll circle every year, it'll be different, right? Like there'll be a way to make sure. And so now you can draft your weeks, and then you can choose to rent those weeks out or keep those weeks for yourself, right? So it's a little bit of like almost like a mini timeshare model, but through the ownership of your group. So
Yeah.
you as like a 3 or 4, family group, and then you're in the management dashboard. You're looking at your P&L, you're looking at your equity as it increases, and then should you decide that, hey, I need to exit, this, my 25% in this property.
Right. Right.
We give you a few different mechanisms. Usually, it's a first right of refusal to the other owners. Like, hey, you guys you want this 25%. Here's what it's currently valued at. Then
Gotcha.
there's amongst family and friends. So you could do a private, kind of offer to family and friends, or you could put it on the exchange and it be more public.
Really cool.
So yeah,
I want to talk about it feels like there's so many different revenue streams that are possible here. But talk a little bit about the current business model versus perhaps what might occur a little bit down the road here, because there's so many layers.
Right now, there are a lot of places you can monetize, but there's kind of three main places for us. So the agent is a big part of what we do, and what we try to do is we essentially try to make this a layup for agents who get groups, right? And because groups are hard to deal with if you're an agent, and because then the agent's asking a ton of questions, or the group's asking a ton of questions. But since we're getting the group vetted, qualified, pre-approved, everything ready to go, basically, we usually take about 40% of the agent's commission there. And if kind of the agent referral world, if I tell my cousin in Aspen, hey, I got a guy for you, and I put them in touch, I get 25% just for that phone call, right? So we do a lot for that extra. Some agents might be like, oh no, but what a lot of the agents we've seen is they realize this is one, building another revenue stream for them, right? Because oftentimes it's not competing with their solo buyers buying single family or other things. The other thing is it actually increases what they call their sphere of influence, their SOI. So now you're introduced to 4 families who are buying. Now, if any of those 4 families buy again, they know you, right? And that's gold, because most of agents' business is repeat business, and we don't take any commission that repeat business and so forth. So we usually get about 1% of the transaction price there. And then we do everything from, let's say you guys are getting a beach place together or something like that, you and 3 other families. We furnish the home, get it ready for Airbnb. My wife happens to be an interior designer, so we furnish homes, but we get 25 to 30% off. I'll give you the kind of the sausage making. We get a percentage off that, but we pass part of that on to the customer, but we take part of it as well, right? So there's furnishing, purchasing, maybe some layout and design if needed. Then we have the dashboard, which is a much lower expense, but think of you're paying a certain monthly rate to just know everything is in one place, how LLC notifications, calendar, all of that stuff. And then there's a bunch of services you can imagine along the way, everything from insurance to other things that we get a small cut of. So, and then at the end, as it's being sold either outright by the whole group or in fractions, we're also getting 1% of that. So our lifetime value ends up being, fairly sizable at the end of the day, which allows us to invest into those relationships. And what we're finding is that, and we'll see, right? All of this is to be proven in 2, 3, 4 years, right? Because we're doing this long term, is that people want to buy more than one of these, right? They now are like, oh snap! For the price of maybe I'll delay that car 3, 4 more years, and now I have an appreciating asset here, right? Or maybe whatever it may be, people are now saying these trade-offs that didn't exist, where they could spend their money, now exist, right?
Well, for the same price of buying a home, you could own 25% of several homes, right?
Totally. Exactly. That's exactly the thought, and or you end up, starting with a multifamily in the city you live in, and that's paying for itself. And in a year or 2, you're taking equity out, and then you're able to, so there's all types of models, and we're here. And I would like to tell people we're not giving investment advice. We're not and we're not, saying this is not a silver bullet. In fact, there are times where we'll say to somebody like, maybe you should wait, maybe you should.
Totally. Yeah. I think
we have to at least be like, here's the guide, here's the education. Let's make sure that, you have this opportunity.
Well, it's beneficial for you guys to do that due diligence, right? And to make sure that this is right for them, because like you said, your revenue is sort of not dependent on, them being on the platform for a long time, but the lifetime value of a customer is so much higher if you're bringing the right customers on board and educating them and say, hey, maybe wait a year, right? Maybe wait, a year and a half. Like that's different. Many startups won't tell you that, right? They won't tell you like, hey, don't get our product quite yet because you're not quite ready.
Well,
So,
and
but
that's
I
why.
think that's really powerful in a lot of ways because look what we saw with the financial crisis. A lot of people weren't ready to buy homes,
Right.
right? A lot of people were not ready to maybe even invest in homes that they were. So to me, that education part is absolutely paramount.
No, totally. And I mean, and that's why it's big for us to continue to grow. And it's been great to see the growth, but also continue to grow to be a sustainable company, So for the founders kind of out there, I've been on both sides of it, but where you get dangled with large valuations and take a ton of money and stuff like that. But then
Yep. Yep.
you're making trade-offs on decision making. Like, if you were to tell me like instead of a 500 person company, we're a 50-person company, but we're still doing what we're doing and we're sustainable and we're helping people, build generational wealth who might not have had the opportunity.
Yep.
I'd take that in a heartbeat versus being a 500 person company that is.
Mm-hmm.
And some of my investors will be like, wait, I thought you wanted.
Yeah. Hold on.
But I think there's something I think there's the possibility of building it, but I think you just got to build it, right, and have a solid foundation and be able to make decisions. Because if you're chasing the valuation, if you're worrying about your burn all the time, you'll make a lot of decisions, right, to push people through a process that they just might not be ready for. So it's important that we can have integrity and do that.
I want to end here. Thank you so much for your time. I want to end here on a little bit about the future and maybe some of the goals and successes you and the team would like to achieve. I mean, the space is so dynamic and it's ever fluid, right? It's up and down. It goes through ebbs and flows. But as you look maybe 3 to 5 years down the road for Nestment, you and the team, what are some of the goals and successes you would like to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the goals and successes. So I think 5 years, if I look 5 years down, I'd like the notion of co-ownership and co-buying to truly be part of like the cultural kind of ethos, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it kind of is on the fringes now, but it's moving towards. And because you have the pressure of these economic trends that you mentioned earlier, helping push it. And so I would love for Nestment to be the one that helped kind of usher that cultural kind of trend in. And then I think, maybe give that 3 year in an ideal world, maybe 3 years, people are using the term Nestment the way they might use Airbnb, right? When it comes to co-ownership, like, oh, I'm going,
Totally.
Investment together.
Yep.
And it's not, that's not to like say, because we want arrogance around, but we want to be a brand that's taking care of people, that's known for like, hey, we're going to help you to get on that path of home ownership. And then I think 5 years, and we're doing these right now, we're doing very real pilots where it can't just be about people wanting to do it and hacking the system, right? Like we know people are hacking the system. There's gray areas, there's things like that. I would love it's not often that an early stage startup goes and brings their platform to Fannie and Freddie, to the CFPB, the Consumer Federal. But we did that. We said like, hey, we're launching our beta in 2 weeks. I'm down to walk anyone through this. And we were sat in those rooms and shared what we were doing, because I do think there has to be more of that kind of it's not just about breaking things, right? It's about, can we, yes, sometimes you'll have to break things, but like, can we actually say, hey, rather than breaking things, let's get on a path together where we shape and re-evolve. Can we rethink about what family, home, real estate means? So I think in 5 years, so 3 years cultural momentum, 5 years kind of structural changes is what I'd love to see. And then in 10 years, I just love to see this be, part of the process of generational wealth building, of community. I'd love to see more families be able to either live together and communally live in own places. I'd love to see friends go through the process, and I think that's kind of what we're aimed for, and we should see a difference in the rate of whether it be certain minority groups being able to own and afford. I think there's going to be something really fascinating with baby boomers and their properties and understanding where that capital goes, but also mean, I'm going through it right now, like as my wife and my parents, my mom and as her parents age, what did we decide to do? Right? There's triplexes all over San Francisco because it used to be three generations living together. Right?
Wow.
For some
Yeah.
people, that might be like, I don't really want to do that. But there's something interesting about that, because if there's a housing supply issue and other things, like, can we build a new evolved way to think about either three generations living together or three
Yeah.
friends, three families living together? Are we able to? I'm a big proponent, not necessarily of, I'm not against low income housing. I think that's really important, but I'm really, especially in a place like San Francisco, really focused on all housing. But I'm also focused on, can we get like our professional class of teachers, firefighters, police
Yep.
officers, folks, to be able to live in the cities and the communities, not just the city, but actually the community that they serve and
Yeah, it's
protect
huge.
and service. Like, how do we create these models where we can put roofs over the heads of people who really, really are in desperate situations, but also those who, maybe have been left out, but are also servicing the communities as well. So, yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much, Niles, for taking the time.
Thank
And this
you for
was
giving me the opportunity, Grant. I appreciate it. I look forward to just staying in touch,
Yeah.